Hi friends, I'm sitting out back in my yard and I thought I'd read you chapter 9 from this nice location this evening. Chapter 9 is called Mr. Martin's Escape. So remember they're on the train. Myrtle has been asked to go sit in the back, or told to go sit in the back, and that's where we left off. And she's met the old woman, what's her name? Mrs. Merganser. The train climbed steeply up into what Miss Dexter said, when she was started speaking again, were the Blue Ridge Mountains. But darkness had fallen, and the only thing Violet could see out the window was the reflection of the inside of the train car. 2 long rows of passengers, mostly women, on red mohair-covered seats, surrounded by their handbags, hat boxes, picnic baskets, valises, and traveling pillows. "I hope you understand I'm not a radicalist, Violet," Miss Dexter was saying as she unpacked fried chicken, biscuits, and apples from a picnic basket. "Mr. Martin doesn't seem to understand this. He doesn't seem to realize that with everything we women have worked so hard for in the balance, we can't be distracted by every little battle that comes our way." I want you to think about if these race relations, black versus white, are a little battle. Mr. Martin had gone to look for something for them to drink. "Can I take some of this to Myrtle?" Violet asked, indicating the meal Miss Dexter was serving out. A few days ago, she would have considered it the very height of bad breeding to ask her hostess for more food, but she was starting to realize that being well brought up had its disadvantages. It kept you from asking for the things you needed. "Yes, of course," said Miss Dexter. "I certainly don't intend to starve the child," she added, wrapping some food up in a napkin. "Separation of the races doesn't necessarily mean inequality, Violet. It just..." In honor of her newfound rudeness, Violet walked away without waiting to hear the end of this. Violet worked her way toward the back of the train. There was no point in asking directions, she thought, on a train. She found the colored car all the way at the back. Clutching the napkin in her fist, she opened the last door and walked back through the aisle of colored passengers. She found Myrtle sitting next to an elderly woman. I want you to think for a second, what do you think is the reaction of the people in this train car to a white girl walking back there? "I brought you some dinner," said Violet. She held out the napkin. "Thanks," said Myrtle. "Mrs. Merganser, this is my friend Violet." Mrs. Merganser looked at Violet and nodded a greeting. Then she closed her eyes and seemed to fall asleep. Violet supposed she must be too old to stay awake. "Can I sit down?" she asked. She felt uncomfortable being the only white person in the colored car, but she was tired of Miss Dexter and in no hurry to get back to her. And there was something she wanted to ask Myrtle about anyway. "Sure." Myrtle made a space between herself and the window, and Violet squeezed into it. The rattan seats in the colored car were even more uncomfortable than the mohair-covered iron springs. Why didn't they make train seats out of something more comfortable? "I think Mr. Martin might be on the run from the police," she said to Myrtle. "Did you only now just figure that out?" said Myrtle. "Well, when did you figure it out?" Violet asked, annoyed. "First time I saw him back in New York, when he jumped a mile when we came into the room." Violet wasn't sure if Myrtle was telling the truth or was just trying to show how smart she was. Anyway, Violet had more pressing concerns. "But don't you think he might be a little bit smitten with my sister?" "Yes," Myrtle frowned. They sat in silence for a moment. Sorry about the helicopter. "Doesn't your sister know how to send a fella to the rightabout if he gets too fresh?" "I guess so," said Violet. One way or another, Chloe had certainly sent the Mr. R's to the rightabout. "Then I wouldn't worry about it," said Myrtle. "But what about him being on the run from the police, we think?" Myrtle did that shrug thing with her eyes. Apparently, she didn't consider being on the run from the police a major character flaw. "Well, he could be dangerous," said Violet. "He could hurt us." "He hasn't hurt us yet, has he?" said Myrtle. Violet must have conveyed by her expression that this wasn't a satisfactory answer, because Myrtle added, "There are lots of ways to get in trouble with the law without hurting anybody, you know." Violet did not know this. Anyway, I think maybe she already sent him to the rightabout, and now he wants to try to get her to change her mind. Myrtle nodded. She must have come to the same conclusion. Maybe she'll want to change her mind. I don't think so, said Violet. She doesn't want a gentleman friend. She sent these fellas back home in Susquehanna to the right-about, and they were much better looking than Mr. Martin. Looks aren't everything, said Myrtle sagely. How many of you wrote about that theme in your paragraph? Don't judge a book by its cover, right? Looks aren't everything. Violet was starting to get a prickly, uncomfortable feeling in the back of her neck. She turned around quickly. From the studied way that everyone was looking somewhere else, she was sure they had all been staring at her a second ago. Am I not supposed to be in here? Said Violet. I don't know, said Myrtle. Probably not. Violet got up. Being out of place was unpleasant. It made your stomach hurt. She might as well go back and get her own dinner. I'll see you later, she said. She turned to say goodbye to Mrs. Merganser, but the old woman was sound asleep. She must be too old even to talk anyway, Violet thought. Just as she got back to the suffragist car, a door at the other end of it snapped open and 2 men strode in. The men were dressed in black suits with starched collars that seemed to hold their chins up uncomfortably high. They marched down the car and stopped in the aisle next to Miss Dexter. Excuse me, ma'am, said one of the men. Is there a man occupying this seat? He pointed to the place Mr. Martin had just vacated. Yes, said Miss Dexter, looking surprised. He's just gone to get drinks. Aha, said the man who had spoken, and the 2 men looked at each other and nodded. Then they just stood there. As Violet came up to them, she could see this made Miss Dexter nervous. They made Violet nervous, too. They had an official police-like air about them. May I ask who you are? Miss Dexter said. I'm sorry, ma'am, we're not at liberty to say, said the man who had spoken first. Then the train lurched around a bend, and both men fell sprawling down the aisle, their arms and legs tangled together. They picked themselves up with great dignity, as if they had meant to fall down. They made their way back up the aisle to Miss Dexter, gripping the edges of the seats tightly. Violet didn't know who these men were, but she and Myrtle both thought Mr. Martin was running from the police. Mother and Father would probably have thought Mr. Martin was beyond the pale, but Myrtle liked him. Maybe he hadn't even really done whatever it was the police were after him for. Maybe there had been some kind of mistake. Violet made up her mind. Even if there hadn't been a mistake, she wasn't going to let the police catch Mr. Martin. She liked him. He talked to her like she was a person, and he'd stuck up for Myrtle, too. Whatever else he might have done, well, she just hoped it wasn't anything too horrible. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'm on the middle of 103.